it's about the quest to want to be well. It's not about losing weight. It's not about these sort of specifics around aesthetics or pressure or because it's January. What is a chilling fact and is true in Australia, the US, and here is that the British and wherever else Dietetic Association is sponsored by Nestle, Coca-Cola, and
I'm Luca. Welcome, Stephanie, to the Living Care podcast, and it's a channel where we like to talk to professionals in the field and other service providers and experts and help people navigate their care journey, really.
Hi, thanks for having me, Luca. I'm pleased to be here.
Thanks for joining us. So your background, tell us all about your background, what you do and how you came to be doing it, please.
Sort of summary of what I do at the moment is work as a clinical nutritionist, but that's quite broad, and I come from various disciplines and I bring them all in, so it's not quite as simple as it sounds. So I have worked for over 30 years in the field of natural health, meaning using lots of different tools to support one's health, be it getting through an illness or a long-term condition, or just to optimize one's health. It started with physical therapy. So I was a massage therapist and a fitness trainer eons ago and loved the human body and was intrigued by the human body, but it wasn't enough as far as my desire to help people. That led to a master's in psychotherapy and then a degree in nutritional medicine, and then having the physical and the psychological and the nutritional. They all came together in my own mind, while it also all came together really in the scientific field, where we can't be siloing all these aspects of the human being because we are not. We're just one big homogenous whole.
Yeah, and a holistic approach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
we could call it, couldn't we? It's one of the best explanations of the human body and the whole system that I've heard is a bit like a Swiss watch. You could take any parts out of the watch and the whole thing's going to stop working. What part of the Swiss watch is most important? Every part is as important as the other. Food, sleep.
Right. That because it can be the tiniest part of a Swiss watch and it can throw everything off, and it's the same with the human body. They're the big obvious levers, but actually just one or two small things that are out of sync and things can go down the wrong direction. And I can give some very exacting descriptions of that in a moment to do with the brain. But yes, we've got to look at the body as a whole and treat it as such. And particularly with this sort of differentiation, which has gone on for a long time between body and brain, as if they are separate bits and work differently and get affected differently by what's going on. And that's a big part of what I'm doing now. And with the book I've just published is about integrating that idea of brain health, mental health, psychological resilience, and how we can manage that through our physical body as well as our mental resilience. So, yeah, they are all interlinked, and we need to understand that and appreciate that. And there are some very simple things that we can do to help augment our mental health, be it neurological or mental status, through what we do physically. It's not such a leap when we consider how we get that gut feeling about things, or if we're really stressed or anxious, we can feel nauseous and not feel like eating. There are experiences most people will have had where it seems obvious that something emotional has happened and it affects you physically or vice versa. And yet we haven't looked at it like that from a treatment or a health principle for a long time. And that's thankfully beginning to change.
Yeah. Do you think that certain modern treatments and modern medicine might encourage people to look at things in isolation? I don't say if you've got dandruff, then I say, okay, get anti-dandruff shampoo. But actually, if you look at your diet, if you eat too much wheat and maybe some other inappropriate foods in excess, that might be causing the dandruff, right?
Right. Yeah.
And yet people, okay, just fix the symptom rather than look at the actual root cause.
Sadly, I think modern medicine or Western medicine, however you want to couch it, is about symptom management. And people in my field commonly talked about as alternative medicine, but I don't really see it like that. I see it as integrative. I'm not against modern medicine by any means, but we can help support those systems by integrating the whole body, because much of modern medical knowledge comes from what is addressing symptoms and not looking back at cause, because it's so much more complicated and it's so much more individual. And it's just not the way the modern paradigm works. And so, yes, going back to the cause is, of course, a better solution, but it's a much more complicated, often longer solution. And we can't just
Do you
blame.
think it is, though? Do you think it is complicated? Or, I don't know, if I could offer up an analogy about, I don't know, animals in a zoo, if they looked unhealthy, first of all, probably people would say, what are the zookeepers feeding them on? And then next, they're going to look at their habitat and go, a wolf doesn't live in a pen which is 40 meters by 40 meters.
Right.
It should open access to the prairie and should be chasing after this animal and that animal, and it should be living in packs. And so there's,
Very
you know,
obvious, low hanging
I'm
fruit
thinking
kind of-
diet, environment. I'm thinking so the appropriate socialization. I suppose I should have asked, do you just, when you are holistically looking at a client or someone's needs whose system might have come into disequilibrium, do you focus on those core areas, diet, sleep, environments, social interactions?
Yeah, they're all key tenets to a strong and healthy body. And when I start working with a patient for the first time, I am really investigating. I have a pre-arrival form, which is very detailed, and then I have a long conversation with them about, when do you remember last feeling well? Okay, you stopped feeling well at this point. What was going on then, or what had been going on the run up to? Because lack of sleep, too much stress, yes, a change in diet, social isolation, lack of exercise. These are all huge movers in whether or not your body's going to work well, but it's cumulative and it takes time. And so I do, coming back to the whole modern medicine thing, I think acute medicine can be brilliant. If I break a leg or get in a car accident, I'm going to want to go to hospital. If we are looking at what we call chronic disease, which is what modern disease really is, things that are building up over a long period of time due to the way we live our life, then we have to be redressing these things. And like your analogy with the zoo animals, we live in a world that is so far removed from our evolutionary selves. It's happened so quickly.
When do you put the cutoff, though, that humans stop living in their natural environments and start living in unnatural environments?
About 10,000 years ago, which is a blip, a tiny blip in our evolution. And then certainly exponentially, so radically in the last 100, 150 years. And our bodies haven't had a chance to catch up. And then just in the last 20, 30 years, the change in food, the evolution of technology, our sedentary lifestyles, our exposure to chemicals that our bodies have absolutely no clue what to do with and are getting overrun with and overwhelmed with, mean that I believe we have to work harder at living well now than ever, because there are so many things out to get us now compared to my parents or my grandparents' generation. We're just up against it more, so we have to be better at looking after ourselves. Now, most people's bodies are phenomenally resilient, and your body wants you to be well. But if there are roadblocks constantly being put in the way of your body being able to create an equilibrium and homeostasis, which is a term we talk about for the body being able to balance itself, then you are going to be limited in how well you feel, whether that's physically or mentally.
How do you decide what to investigate or rather do something about first when you're helping a client? Because you might think if someone is on a highly inflammatory, super refined junk food diet, okay, that's probably the first thing to do, because they're not going to possibly sleep well until that's being sorted out. But, or I don't know, say if the environment's wrong or they're having too much stress, then you might address the stress thing. But what are some things you think about when you decided what to look at first, how to communicate that, and then how to go from A to B to behavior change on that?
Yeah, and behavior change is so key because people find all sorts of reasons not to, or if their biology is out of sync, it's just hard to have that commitment to change. One of the areas I work with primarily, because it has such an influence over many systems in the body and is relatively easy to start changing and the effects are quick, is the gut microbiome, which I have been specializing in for about 12 years. And really, it's only been fully known about in the last 15, 20 years. The science is ever emerging. It's a huge area of scientific research in the world. And the understanding increasingly is showing how if we better support the microbes that live in our gut, so the gut microbiome, which weighs around 4 pounds or 2 kilos, which is staggering, just microbes in the gut. So these are non-human, yet they are programming, influencing, aligning, and communicating with systems all around the body and including the brain. So if we start there, because that can change meal by meal, then it becomes a bit more attainable, realistic. And once you start with that, then you start to nudge other things. It can help with sleep and stress. And people often are feeling uncomfortable with their digestion. They have digestive symptoms. If we start managing some of that, then I can start to implement other things. Gut microbes, and I do a lot of blood testing. So I would check if there are obvious deficiencies and addressing those. And there are some key ones that I am almost always seeing nutritionally deficient in people. Get that balanced with the microbiome, then we can start layering up other things too.
Just briefly, how would you assess someone, all right, okay, don't go into too much detail, but assessing someone's microbiome, I'm sure there's a fecal test done, but what is considered to be good and what's considered to be bad?
I'm not overly enthusiastic about stool analysis, which is what you're talking about. So we can sequence the microbes and the DNA of the microbe diagram, so the genetic material in the microbes that we find in people's stool. And it's becoming more and more common, more and more companies are doing it. The technology for sequencing has become so much better in the last few years. So it gives a lot of information, but is that information useful? Increasingly, I'm thinking not, because we don't.
Well, what's the point? If they've got a terrible diet, they're going to have a terrible microbiome, right?
And they'll have symptoms. They'll have some level of symptoms.
And they'll have a ton of symptoms.
And if they're eating
so why not just see the diet, right?
Address the diet. We don't need to do an expensive stool test to be told that. What it can be useful for is picking up specific pathogens. So if it looks like someone might have a parasitic infection or a pathogenic infection of nasty bacteria, that's different. So from food poisoning or a really nasty bug, and then they haven't got rid of it. And that's where the sort of investigation comes in. If someone says they were traveling and then they got dysentery, they got some kind of food poisoning, and they've never been right since, then we do a test and see what is it that they picked up and have never got rid of. And then there's a set protocol to get rid of it. But mostly, no, we just crack on with improving the gut microbiome because most people would benefit from it. And I am very clear with everybody. I don't know what your microbiome should look like because everybody's is individual. We still don't understand enough about what is staying in as opposed to what's coming out. So we don't know that what is in the stool is necessarily a useful indication. And depending on where you are in the world and who you live with and whether or not you've got animals in your house and what diet you've been raised to have will change the balance of your microbiome. So we haven't got a definitive, this is the perfect microbiome.
But let's go back 10,000 years to the Garden of Eden, practically, should we say, before what's considered to be civilization started, and what were people eating, in your opinion, back then? What is a human's natural diet?
It would depend where they were around the world, but I think general consensus is, and certainly not everybody agrees on this, it was an omnivore diet. I'm pretty confident about an omnivore diet. So when there was the opportunity to eat meat, they would have eaten meat because it would have been a prize food for calories, for protein, for nutrients. They wouldn't have known that, but they would have known it was good for them, which is why we think, and when you look at wolves, they do that. When they make a kill, they will eat the liver first. It is the most nutrient-dense food. These animals aren't stupid. They know what they're doing.
The alpha gets the liver, right?
Absolutely. And the muscle meats, which we pride now as being the best, the chicken breast and the lean cuts of meat, they would for the lowlier wolves or the peoples because, yes, rich in protein, but not rich in much else. So very interesting. So yes, omnivore, yes, meat eaters or fish eaters when the opportunity arose. There would have been time when there wasn't much of that. And so we were gathering roots, so starchy food coming from roots and tubers, berries and nuts. But bear in mind, like if you see a wild blueberry or a wild strawberry, they are minute. They are so tinsy tiny and they taste incredible, not so sweet as the great monsters that we've hybridized and grown today. And so to collect enough fruit, berries, wild berries, to collect nuts that you would have to climb trees for and break open, and all of that availability just wasn't there. So you'd have to work quite hard at gathering. So there would have been nuts and seeds, some sorts of fruits, depending on where you were in the world, various grasses, and other plant matter, eggs if they could find them, honey if they could find it, omnivore diet.
Mm. Yeah. Interesting. I'm thinking that in general, probably the proportion would have been stacked towards meats, fish, and things like that, just because go out into the wild and try to find some roots that you can eat or grasses you can eat.
I mean, if they would have spent all day foraging, it's interesting when you look through the evolutionary science, how when early man learned to create fire, then growth of brains and bones and muscles went up exponentially, because in being able to cook the meats and probably the plant foods, we don't really know, but in cooking, the availability of the nutrients became much more readily absorbed through the body. And one of the key areas I work on is how well are you absorbing your food? It could be the best diet in the world, but if your body doesn't know what to do with it because you're so stressed, you're not making stomach acid, forget about it. You're not absorbing your nutrients. So in having fire, cooking food, the availability of nutrients went up, so they needed less of it to be well nourished, and then they began to thrive. It's so interesting, and that's why I'm often telling people not to eat raw food. Most people don't eat raw meat, but certainly raw vegetables are pretty indigestible and not a good idea for most people, particularly if you haven't got a very robust digestive system. So these primal ways of living seem so misplaced in our modern world, but they hold great value. And I'm not expecting people to go out and forage and hunt down a buffalo, but I do recommend people mimic as much as is realistically possible the balance of meals, the timing of meals, to give some sense of what we probably evolved to eat. And that's so important.
Yeah, really interesting, Stephanie. Yeah, I'm into quite a few of those things.
Yeah, I can tell.
I'll share a bit about that maybe after recording, but I've got some interesting sources for you.
There's a lot of pushback, I have to say. I just hands up, I was vegan for nearly 8 years in my 20s, in the misplaced belief that it was good for me. I'm also a huge animal lover, so it felt comfortable for me to be a vegan. I got really sick. I was type 2 diabetic. I was sarcopenic. I was osteopenic. So I was losing muscle and bone, even though I was running it took a massive toll on my body because my body isn't suited. I am so primal. I am so much like a...
But this is interesting. You say your body isn't suited, but we wouldn't look at animals and say that monkey's good with bananas, but that monkey is good with something else. Whereas with humans, we say this individual diet is good for that person, but this totally different diet is good for the other. Is it just that other person can tolerate, say,
certain genetic predispositions and gut microbial predispositions that would allow somebody to do better than I did? For example, in certain plant foods, carrots are a great example. There is something called beta carotene. And it is commonly talked about as being vitamin A, which is incorrect. But the body can turn beta carotene, this compound in carrots, into vitamin A in the body, but only if you have certain genetic situations that allow your body to do that. If one cannot, me included, turn beta carotene into vitamin A very well, you're going to become vitamin A deficient, and vitamin A is massively important. The same applies to vitamin D. Some people just don't absorb vitamin D very well. I don't. So if you're not eating animal foods, you're going
from their
diet. And we just don't get enough sunshine. We're not exposing our bodies for long enough, and we don't get enough sun here. So there are weaknesses in a vegan diet, and anyway. And then if you don't have a certain biology that can really work hard at extracting certain nutrients and converting them to their active form, forget about it. Now, most people tend to get a bit of a buzz from a vegan diet in their first maybe 6 months, even maybe a year. Often that's simply because they've cleaned up their diet and they're not eating so much rubbish. However, many vegan foods these days are so woefully inadequate and highly processed and nasty that just because they don't contain animal products doesn't mean on any level they're good for you. But back then, when I was doing it in the early 90s, there wasn't all the vegan junk food. I was very conscientious. I was cooking on my lentils and beans. It doesn't suit me. I am predisposed to high blood sugars. Living on a plant-based diet was a nightmare for my body. So one does have to be a bit careful about writing everything off. But your point is well made. I don't know anybody who wouldn't thrive on an omnivore diet. So we can all do really well if we have some plant food and some animal food. Few people can really thrive on a vegan diet. There are exceptions.
As you say, it's probably temporary, but then eventually, as the body
As a deficient
runs out
gut.
the nutrients
Yeah.
and vitamins, that it's really going to start struggling.
Yeah.
I've heard of late people calling dementia type 3 diabetes, which obviously massively suggests that diet is, in vascular dementia, I think, is absolutely key. But what's your opinion on that, and what is the ideal diet for someone at risk of dementia, or who wants to avoid dementia, or who actually indeed has dementia at that point in time?
Yeah, dementia can manifest in various different ways. We certainly talk about Alzheimer's, which is a common form by far of dementia, as type 3 diabetes. Also, now we're seeing a correlation with Parkinson's. So probably most, if not all, neurological diseases are influenced by poor blood glucose control, which I can explain in a second, and which my book addresses. My latest book, Eat Your Brain Happy, addresses how poor blood sugar regulation affects mental health. So we're talking about brain function, whether it's a neurological decline or whether it's chemical imbalance that might manifest as mental health problems. This is so key for every aspect of our health, and I really think it's underappreciated, because if people are aware of blood glucose at all, it's usually just in relation to either weight gain or diabetes. And it's so much more than that. In our bloodstream, we should have roughly around 4 to 5 grams of sugar, cooked blood glucose. And that enables there to be fast and ready fuel available to our cells at all time. And we have various mechanisms to keep just that right. It's about 1 teaspoon of glucose in the bloodstream at all.
In your whole system.
In your whole system. In all the 5.5 liters of blood, you've got a very weak solution of sugar. So we don't need much of it. And when there is too much, it's dangerous. The body is in high alert. We know that lots of sugar in the blood damages blood vessels. So the delicate lining inside the blood vessels can get, I call it creme bruleeing of the blood vessels. It gets hot and crispy and stops the blood vessels being flexible and doing their job properly. And we see the same thing happening in the brain. So when there is an excess amount of sugar in the blood, and that comes predominantly from the food we choose to eat, then too much sugar over a period of time, and it's probably decades, can lead to something called insulin resistance of the brain, where the sugar's building up, the body can't clear it, there's a chemical imbalance, and now metabolically, energy-wise, the brain's really struggling. And it also causes an inflammatory response where there is damage to neurons and an overprotection from cells called glial cells that protect our neurons. And over time, that causes a sort of a shrinking and a hardening, and these tau tangles and plaques build up. And
if you would, just explain that inflammatory mechanism in a bit more detail, if you could. My understanding is that it's, immune and general inflammation around the whole body. Your defensive mechanism doesn't really know what it should or shouldn't deal with or attack, and as a result, let's say if you've got a wheat intolerance, for example, you might eat wheat. Some of that might go into your bloodstream. It gets moved around your whole body, and it sends your autoimmune system into a bit of a low-level anti sort of invader, which we call it, zone, and it basically causes low-level inflammation, which it obviously affects your joints and your blood vessels and your arteries, as well as your brain, etc. But what?
Okay, so what you're talking about is a condition called leaky gut, or a better, sort of more accurate term is gut lining hyperpermeability. So wheat is a hugely common cause of this, or not exclusively. Alcohol, antibiotics, various other things can cause this to happen. So we have this long digestive tract. It's 6 meters long. It's crazy long. And it has a very delicate lining that is 1 cell thick. And it is the interface between the food that's coming in and what we allow then to pass through this tiny barrier into the body. And there are cells that line the gut, which are held together with proteins called tight junctions, and it's like Velcro. And these cells are held together, and they open a tiny bit to let nutrients through. So when you're digesting your food, your vitamins and minerals can pass into your bloodstream and nourish your body. But any nasties, any big gnarly stuff doesn't get through the gut wall, and then we just poop it out. If we start to have a breakdown of these tight junctions and the cells start to open up, this is the hyperpermeability, the leaky gut. Now big stuff gets through. And that might be gluten, which is a big protein found in wheat, predominantly wheat, other grains too, but we grow wheat to be so high in gluten these days. So big old gnarly gluten might get through, or other undigested proteins, or any number of nasty things can pass into the bloodstream. As it's passing through, it passes where 70% of our immune cells lie, and we get an immune reaction. So now your immune system's kicking off going, oh my gosh, what's this? What's this? We've got gluten in the bloodstream. We don't like this. And now you're having an inflammatory immune response to something like peanut or gluten. And the immune system is trying to attack it. And now you become hypersensitive to these proteins, be it gluten or something else. So now your body's kind of on fire. It's having this cytokine response. We heard about that in COVID. Lots of immune reactivity, lots of inflammatory response, which is a life-saving, critical, brilliant, fantastic response as and when we really need it. But in this case, where you might be having toast for breakfast and a sandwich for lunch and pasta for dinner, constant wheat, constant gluten, constant opening up and leaking of the gut barrier, your body is firefighting, crisis managing constantly. And while that's going on, you're only ever causing damage and you're never allowing for repair. Now, that can be going on behind your eyes, in your brain, in your joints, any number of different places. And we call this an autoimmune response. Your immune system is mistakenly overreacting, attacking things in the bloodstream, and then starting to attack bits of yourself by mistake. And interestingly, with gluten, autoimmune and gluten, one of the most common conditions I work with, particularly with women, is a thyroid condition called Hashimoto's hypothyroiditis, where your thyroid gland, your energy gland, starts to get attacked by your own immune system. And there is this molecular mimicry going on where this sounds so bizarre that the gluten molecule and the immune's reaction to gluten, if it escapes into the bloodstream, the immune system thinks gluten and your thyroid gland are the same thing. So if you've got an immune response going on to gluten, it starts to attack your thyroid as well. And then your thyroid is getting worn down, eaten up by your immune system. And then if you've got no thyroid activity, you've got no energy. Low thyroid, low everything, slow everything. Brain, muscles, energy, everything slows down. Bowels slow down. You get constipated. But yes, again, this comes back to what we were saying at the very beginning. Everything is interconnected. And if we can shore up that gut lining and fix those tight junctions, which is relatively easy to do, calm the immune system down, which calms down the immune response, then the body breathes a sigh of relief, go, oh, are we okay right now? Oh, let's do a bit of mending then. And my job often with people is facilitating their bodies doing more of the mending and the restoring and less of the harming. We're always harming. Every time you exercise, you're causing damage to your body. Every time you're breathing oxygen, you're doing damage to your body. We're good at managing that. It's all a matter of degree and then finding ways to compensate, calm, and restore, which is where good sleep practices and the appropriate amount of exercise and the right kind of foods facilitates the body sorting itself out afterwards.
Interesting you mentioned the appropriate amount of exercise. I've started using that term as well, appropriate, because I think there can be a tendency to think that more is better with certain things.
Yes, I wrote this book years ago. It's called Why Eating Less and Exercising More Makes You Fat. It's kind of a title, but it makes the point. And it's how this is what I was doing to myself. I was under eating. I was on a vegan diet and I was running 10 kilometers a day. My body was broken. And in my naive, ill-informed belief system of more is better, I just thought, well, I better run more and eat less then. Then I'll get there. And of course, never did.
What's your understanding now of the mechanism that was at play primarily for causing that effect? Was it release of hormones?
Certainly, I was running my own business. I wasn't eating appropriately, so very low protein, very low fat diet. Terrible. Anybody, never mind a stressful person. Over exercising, so a hyper-inflamed body, too much blood glucose. And cortisol, our main stress hormone, is a bully. And it's a life-saving hormone, so it takes priority for many mechanisms in the body. So if we're feeling stressed, and we're full of cortisol's production requires all sorts of nutrients and precursor hormones, and they all get sucked down the route of making the stress hormone, and then other elements of hormone production and recovery just get neglected because there aren't enough core nutrients or pre-hormones to do that. So we call it cortisol steal. If you're stressing your body, I was stressing my body by running my own business, not eating a good enough diet, and over-exercising. I was stressed on so many levels that all of the bare nutrients that I had, which weren't enough, were going down the stress hormone route, and there wasn't enough to back up everything else to manage all these other systems that were going awry. It's multifactorial, definitely, but obvious now in hindsight that there was so much out of balance. Yet, if anybody were to have looked at me in my 20s doing all this, I would have been labeled as being someone who was super healthy, cleanest of clean diets, exercising a lot, everything was in place. So yeah, it's ironic, really.
What's your take on how we went so wrong in the food pyramid and the official guidance that fat should be the least of what we eat rather than say the most? Because I've noticed a neighbour of mine I was chatting to, and sad to say the lady's got a sort of somewhat of a heart condition, and she's now following the official advice that she's been given by her doctor or by the hospital, which is lots of grains, very low fat diet, above all minimize red meat. That's the most important thing to do for her. That's what she's been told. And I didn't have the heart to...
Yeah, where do you start with that? It's so hard.
Where do you start with that? But that's still the advice which is being given out, which I'm surprised actually that the nutritionists in charge of that pamphlet, which is probably nationwide, would put their name to that. Well, I assume it's commonly accepted now that's wrong, but...
No, you are wrong to assume that. And the trouble is, the people who are putting these things together or supporting them and educating the patients with this information, they're dietitians, registered dietitians. So the people in our schools and our hospitals and our prisons and making nutrition plans that become government policy are dietitians. They're quite different, and their training is different, and their requirements are different, and their regulations are different to nutritionists. What is a chilling fact, and is true in Australia, the US, and here, is that the British and wherever else Dietetic Association is sponsored by Nestle, Coca-Cola, Kellogg's. So the funding of the training and the educational materials of the people making policy are coming from big food. And I don't want to sound conspiratorial. It's just the hard truth. And so when I was diagnosed as a diabetic, I mean, it was a long time ago, but this hasn't changed. I was told to get the fun pack size variety pack Kellogg's cereals to portion control my breakfast. So I could have Rice Krispies or Frosties or whatever else, as long as I didn't have too much. And it is baffling. I give a lot of public talks, and I have a food pyramid that is almost the reverse of what the standard food pyramid is, because the standard food pyramid, that big bit at the bottom, 8 to 12 servings a day of starchy vegetables and grains. If you want to give yourself diabetes, go ahead and do that. It is a travesty. The vilification of red meat is also a great frustration to me, because it's lumped in with processed meat, and when they're doing all these studies that they cite, and they're saying that people who eat red meat are more prone to colon cancer and heart disease and blah, 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 they are not differentiating between people like me who eat things like venison and grass-fed beef. And yes, I'm very lucky to be able to do that, and I make it a priority above anything else. I have high-quality, naturally fed animals, as opposed to some nasty burger in a bun with a milkshake, with fries, with all the things that would cause aggravation in the body, and there happens to be some red meat present, and then it's this cohort that are considered to be at risk. You can't blame red meat for what junk food has done. So we can't put them all in together, and the benefits to good quality red meat are so massive, and organ meats for their nutrient content, ironically for their heart protection, because they contain things like carnitine and other amino acids that are very heart protective. good quality meat contain omega-3, which is hugely important for vascular health, cardiovascular health, brain health. So, and that's another thing that tends to be lacking in a plant-based diet is ready formed or long-chain omega-3 fatty acids, which are essential. They're known as essential fats. Someone like me doesn't convert flaxseed into useful omega-3. Where am I going to get my omega-3 from if I'm living on a plant-based diet? It's not going to happen.
No, it's fascinating, isn't it? Did you hear might have been the USDA actually that came out and said that Lucky Charms were more healthy than an egg?
I mean,
did you hear that one?
Yes, I did. And that anybody even gave it any credence is a travesty. And when you look at something like that and go, what? Just follow the money. The trouble today is even peer-reviewed, seemingly high-quality research data, because it's so expensive to do that, almost always will have been funded by somebody who has an investment in the outcome. If you're doing really good research, you shouldn't know the answer before you start. You should be curious about finding an answer. But with the money that is going into something, the focus is skewed for a certain outcome. So, and surely nobody believes that. Surely nobody believes that. And actually, that was last year, and just the USDA have just sanctioned eggs as being a healthy food. Finally, one of the healthiest foods in the world. If you eat no other animal product, eat eggs, because they are phenomenal. The whole idea that they raise cholesterol completely been dismissed over 12 years ago. And now even the big federations are looking at these things and saying, actually, we think eggs are probably a good idea. And not just 1 or 2 a week. In my world, I'm recommending 16 a week, 2 a day, easily 3 a day. Yeah, the difficulty is, and I think you're coming from the same place, when these deeply entrenched ideas are so locked in, when you start to question it or suggest maybe it's not true, you just sound like you're just making stuff up or being...
I find that if I am discussing this with anyone that
wants to listen,
if anyone that isn't aware of the funders for this research, I just say, what did humans eat 10,000 years ago, 15,000 years ago, before there were farms and any agriculture? What did humans eat? And that's probably our natural diet.
Yes, it is. And when you look at the core ingredients, the essential nutrients, things that we have to get from food because our body can't make them, that's the definition of essential nutrients. And especially for the brain. So our fat-soluble vitamins, vitamin A, D, E, and K, so much of those are caught up in animal foods and not in plant foods. And so to get adequate vitamin D, taking sunshine out of the equation, you have to be eating eggs and liver and red meat. And the same applies, like I just said, with the omega-3 fatty acids found in oily fish and in grass-fed meat. And vitamin A, the ready-to-go form of vitamin A, is going to be in your animal foods. Zinc, iron, all of these nutrients that people are commonly very low in these days because they are afraid. They have been told to stay away from animal foods. And yet, look at the statistics. More obesity than ever, more diabetes than ever, more heart disease than ever, and more cancer than ever. How is it that these recommendations are still...
I think it's amazing to throw a little curveball in how the prevalence of smoking has gone down, I don't know, probably from 50% of adults to something like maybe 5%.
Yeah.
And yet cancer hasn't decreased.
No, I don't know specifically if lung cancer hasn't decreased, but cancers of all types, particularly gastrointestinal cancers. And that's interesting. There is a whole refocus, because it used to be there and then it went away. This idea that cancer is a metabolic condition and not a genetic condition. There may be a few cancers that have a stronger genetic predisposition, but I am very convinced that what was going on, I don't know if you know about Otto Warburg, and he was around in the 20s and the 30s, and he developed the concept of cancer being fed by sugar, basically. Now we know that cancer cells, unlike other healthy cells in the body, ferment glucose and feed on glucose, and they also feed on something else called glutamine, but predominantly they feed on glucose. And more and more we are fueling our bodies with too much sugar, in my opinion, foods that aggressively elevate blood sugar. So the argument isn't that sugar causes cancer, although some people will say that's, but we all have precancerous cells in us all of the time. We always have cells going a bit rogue and going a bit wonky, and a good immune system should get rid of them. A good microbiome should get rid of them. But if you have got a few rogue cancer cells that decide they want to grow, they are going to grow exponentially if you are giving them their mega fuel, which is a constant high supply of sugar. And so that comes back to another reason why keeping blood sugar under control, understanding, as I make very clear in both of my books, the human body stores fuel predominantly in the form of fat. 95% of our storage of fuel is fat. 5% is glucose in our liver and in our muscles. So go figure, what's your body going to run on if you're not eating? It knows perfectly well how to run on body fat. The brain works perfectly well without body fat and running on body fat. We have a ton of it. Even skinny people have a ton of body fat to last for months. Seriously, months. And yet we all get so scared about our blood sugar getting too low. If we have a healthy metabolic system, meaning our body knows how to go from being a sugar burner, if you've just eaten a meal, you're in sugar burning mode, into fat burning mode, because now blood sugar's dropped, you haven't eaten for a few hours, you're not dying, you're burning fat instead. A very healthy, very clean, very sustainable way to survive when there wasn't much food around, which is how we did survive until we started farming 10,000 years ago. And the availability of food in the last 20 or so years, that we could get food whenever. And now this horror that is food being able to be delivered to our house 24/7. People are eating constantly, and it's terrifying. If people did one thing to change, I would say don't snack. Eat your 3 meals, but don't eat in between.
100%. I'm a bit like an elephant at times. And I remember things from when I was a kid that maybe some other people wouldn't remember. And the prevalence of eating in a car. No one used to eat in a car 40 years ago. I'm 51, so born in 73. No one had a drink in a car. No one ate in a car.
No, you make a good point.
Travel in a car.
The older,
You'd travel in a car, and then when you got there, wherever you were going, you might have a drink or food or whatever. It's not like you'd be eating.
No, you wouldn't. I'm 57, and I can remember going on family holidays, and to have like your travel suites, which was a real treat because you were on a
travel suites,
really long journey. And that was like,
that
was the most exciting thing ever. Or you'd stop off somewhere and get something.
Yep.
You just didn't think of it. But also, walking down the street, you weren't drinking coffee and eating sandwiches. You ate when you ate, and then you went on and did your thing. And there's constant need to eat while you're doing everything else. I tell all my patients, do not eat in the car. Do not eat when you're standing up. Do not eat at random times in the night. I think people panic. I think they're going to grind to a halt if they're not constantly eating. But there's also a huge psychological element. People are distracted by it. They're comforted by it. They get a high from it. There is a strong psychological element to why we eat, when we eat, and what we eat.
100%. But how can listeners identify and break free from the old habits or beliefs that are holding them back from reaching their health goals, in your opinion, Stephanie? Other than booking you in, or actually, it's probably a good time to, if someone were wanting to book you in, how would they reach you?
Okay, I have a website, which is health-in-hand.com, health in hand with hyphens. I'm on Instagram as Stephanie J. Moore UK, so you can find me there. I would encourage people, though, to start by, most people know what they're not doing right. So start by being very honest with yourself about those things like, oh, I shouldn't, but I will. Or, oh, I know I feel really terrible when I drink my half bottle of wine every night, or when I don't get to bed in time. Or most people know the starting point. But particularly this time of year, early January, people try and do too much too quickly, and then they just stop because they're fed up, or they don't know where to start. So pick one thing. Just pick one thing that you know is probably a good idea to stop or change, or start to introduce something that you know might be good for you and you might give it a try. And it's a great starting point, and it's simple, so it's doable. And I think is a bit of a game changer for most people, is on waking, drink not just water. Most people don't go straight to their coffee or tea, which I'm fine about coffee and tea, but start with not just water, but warm water with lemon and salt. And for most people, that's salt, but high blood pressure. And no, for your stress hormones, which is a good thing in the morning, and for your recalibration, and for your, it's a sort of osmotic effect if you put in citrus and salt so the water goes into your body better. To start the day with a large glass of warm blood temperature, not hot, not cold, juice of half a lemon or lime, bit of salt. Honestly, everything then just gets more fluid, your blood's flowing, your lymph's flowing, your brain's getting rehydrated because your brain shrinks at night. And you're just upping your energy, and your appetite will change. So you won't suddenly need your cornflakes straight away. I think that's a really nice starting point. And then you can build one thing after another. Wait for the first thing to become a habit so you're not overthinking it. You just do it. And then you're in a headspace to then take on something else.
You mentioned sleep there. Some people have got a big problem getting ready for sleep, mucking around on their phones, sending messages, looking at social media before they go to bed, doing things that, when you compare it to, say, reading, which kind of just lulls you into sleep probably after about 4 or 5 pages most of the time, is really bad for you. But what would you suggest someone that knows that they should be getting to bed at, say, 10:30 and then getting off to sleep? They're just footering around for hours on end before they actually finally do.
Yeah, the first commitment has to be, and I know I sound really dull and old and boring, you just have to turn your phone off by 8. No, you don't need to be checking your Instagram and your email. Some people might need to do emails, but even then organize your work life so you shouldn't be having to check in the evening. And don't take your phone on to bed. If you need it for an alarm clock, set the alarm clock. It doesn't have to be on, or buy an alarm clock. I think this dependence on our phones is so problematic, and not just because of the stimuli that all this information gives us. There is something in the action of the eyes going up and down as opposed to side when we're reading a proper book. It's over engaging the brain. It's causing an excitatory response in the brain, whereas side to side is very soothing. And just the blue light that's coming off. Now, most phones these days have filters for blue light, or you can have a red light on your screen, because blue light is mimicking sunlight, and then that activates the brain instead of turning it off to sleep. All sorts of reasons why phones are a problem. But I don't think there should be any screens. I don't think there should be a television. And I don't think there should be phones or laptops in the bedroom. I really don't.
What are some of the biggest hurdles you see in people addressing and then actually achieving their health goals? What's getting in the way?
Often other people, which is tricky, which is why I try and get, certainly if I'm working with somebody, get their partner involved, not necessarily their children, so that they're doing it as a couple. Because if someone's trying to reduce their alcohol or improve the quality of their food or their sleep pattern, and the other person is going, oh, come on, honey, just another glass. It's all right. Let's watch a movie. Let's watch another part of the series of Netflix. That's just so difficult. But if you can have that conversation with your significant other and go, come on, hun, come on, let's do this together. Oh my gosh, it exponentially improves outcomes. So I think that's important. And understanding those triggers. So a lot of people want to give up alcohol for various reasons or reduce it. So it can be partners or even friends, and that they're guilting people to drink, or, oh my God, you're so boring. Just have a drink. What's the matter with you? When people are trying, we all have to be very conscious of being more supportive around that. And often when people are trying to persuade others to drink with them or eat the crisps or the chocolate or whatever else it is, it's just to make them feel better because they don't want to be shamed into not doing it. We all have to make these positive choices. But it's about the quest to want to be well. It's not about losing weight. It's not about these sort of specifics around aesthetics or pressure or because it's January. It's about feeling of being vital, and when you wake up is so priceless, and it might feel like a long and hard journey, but just taking one step at a time to get there, because once you're there, maintaining it is easy. It's just getting there that's tricky.
Amazing. And for listeners who wanted to know more about your approach, what sources should they consult, or what book should they read?
So my latest book it's called Eat Your Brain Happy, and it is specifically written or addresses specifically depression and anxiety. But actually, and I've had this feedback from people who read the book, what I am recommending is just good old-fashioned healthy way of living. And it's looking at exercise and sleep and food and rhythms of eating and all of that. So the first part does directly look and talk about anxiety and depression, but 2/3 of the book is about how to live a healthy life, because that will help with your anxiety and depression. It will also help with your dementia if you have dementia, probably, or in general, help your body to be well. So key principles like healthy gut microbiome. I talk about the 3 Fs: fiber, fermented foods, and fasting, the 3 things that will help your microbiome to function better. I talk about key principles of every meal that you eat. Have I got protein? Have I got healthy fats? Have I got fiber? So really simple little nuggets that people can apply irrespective of their mental health status or their health status in general.
Thank you.
It's very pretty too.
Been brilliant talking to you, Stephanie. There's a ton that
There's so
much.
There's so much, and particularly talking to people like you who know about it and have a passion and an interest and a frustration with where we're going at the moment. Oh my gosh, we could talk for hours. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks, Stephanie.
My real pleasure.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Take
Take care. Bye-bye.